Industries such as mining and manufacturing are leading employers in the country, but they are also one of the largest consumers of electricity. This putting the spotlight on the balancing act between industrialization, seen as a key for equitable and inclusive growth, and just energy transition. And to talk us through this, we are now joined by the skills that are required in just energy transition. I am now joined by Dr. Presha Ramsarup, who is the director at Wits Centre for Researching Education and Labour. Thank you so much for your time. I think let's start here. There is a conference that's currently taking place to try and answer exactly that question on the skills that are needed to drive just energy transition. Can you tell us about that and some of the bottlenecks that it looks to remove in advancing skills development in that space?
Thank you so much, Ntokozo, and thank you for having me. The conference, we think, is a very important one because often the energy transition is only viewed from a technological perspective. So we look at the transition as a changing and shifting technological transition. So an important bottleneck then is thinking about skills at the end of a technological process. Thinking about skills as a means to implement a technology. What that sets up is not a proactive approach to skills, but a very reactive approach. And that's where we are now. We're thinking about skills at the end of technological processes. So that was one of the important bottlenecks this conference was aiming, was to actually put skills at the forefront, to integrate skills as core to industrial plans, and to actually look at how we can think about skills with a much more forward-looking and perspective. The second bottleneck is that the work that is happening around skills within the energy transition is extremely siloed. We've got work on the hydrogen economy, green vehicles, solar, wind, renewables. And we wanted to bring these people together into a conversation to actually look at how can we think about a skill system and strengthen a cohesive and coherent approach to skills? It's very difficult to think about planning for skills, planning for engineers, planning for technicians, if we're thinking in little silo, semi-sector areas. So this conference and a key outcome of bringing all these key stakeholders together was to actually establish an African research hub for skills and a just transition. So the conference has brought together people from about 14 countries from across Africa as well as other parts of the world.
And one of the issues that have been highlighted is around TVET colleges really being seen as a key driver in transferring those skills in new industries that are offered by just energy transition. Of course, we saw even when Janet Yellen came to visit South Africa pushing the just energy transition agenda, really focusing on the role TVET colleges should be playing. But what are some of the disconnects still there in, seeing that skill transfer?
Yes. TVET, and there's no doubt that TVET and intermediate skills and developing skills at intermediate levels is going to be extremely important in the transition and in enabling the transition. The challenge that we have is that companies and employers in general are struggling to just keep up with innovation processes that are moving rapidly. Technological change, digitization, just a rapid moving pace of the transition. So employers are struggling in that interface between them and their clients. That creates a very difficult environment for TVETs to work with. So TVETs now need to strengthen their relationship with employers to understand changing needs in workplaces, both in current as well as in the future, and to be able to be responsive in that environment. So the workspace that TVETs find themselves in is extremely difficult. And what compounds this is that we actually know the least. We know much more about engineering than we actually know about intermediate skilled jobs, technical jobs. Our education systems were set up largely with much more clear information around learning pathways for people with university degrees, the kind of pathways and how young people can actually transition. And where we are now, TVET colleges are producing people in a reactive way, and we're training people for particular jobs. So we're setting up future problems for TVET colleges, because it's going to perpetuate an idea that their graduates are not finding jobs in the labor market. But it is because we haven't prepared the labor market for these technical jobs. We don't know what these pathways are. We don't know where these people can transition to. We don't know the connected nature of the jobs. If we train people for X job, where can they transition to? So the kind of environment around TVET colleges that they are having to operate in is difficult. And I think that's important to recognize.
And just talking about those pathways, just energy transition is not, of course, about just low carbon development, but it's also ensuring that normal people, normal South Africans and the communities where these projects will be taking place will not be left behind. So how do we really face that balance when there are still those challenges of really keeping up with, the shifting trend and how fast the pace of those pathways in just energy transition are?
Yes, and I think that's extremely important for us to keep in mind, because we're very proud of the fact the growth in renewables in South Africa, and that is something to be lauded. But it's important to also recognize that the growth in renewables is not reflected with the reduction in inequality in this country. And that means that the energy transition is leaving communities behind. And that's a problem. It's a huge issue, that the way we think about the transition needs to be, and that comes from this idea that we're not thinking about the transition as dismantling inequality, dismantling structures of injustice in our society. We're thinking about it as a technological transition. We're implementing technological change. And in that process, we're leaving communities behind. The poor, who should be people that are marginalized, who should be part of this. This is another opportunity for us to transition our economy as well as our society. And if we don't centralize them in the discussion on the just energy transition, we will end up with, yes, an increasing use of renewables in the country, but just new structures of inequality. So I think it's extremely important when we conceptualize and work with it at all levels, business, education systems, politicians, we need to think who's involved, who's benefiting, where are community voices, where's local economic development, where are all the different players within the system.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for talking to us this morning. Of course, that was Dr. Presha Ramsarup, who is the director at the University of Wits Centre for Researching Education and Labour.